the year of Superman. Welcome to the Krypton Report podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, the Superman of Blue, and today I have a special guest. It's been a long time coming. It's been one of those that we've just not found a chance to get together, but I have Mr. Rob O'Connor from the All-Star Superfans podcast. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and to finally make your acquaintance. Yeah, we've talked a lot online over the years, and very proud to be part of the Superman podcasting community alongside with yourself. So delighted to be here and delighted to be discussing what we're going to be talking about tonight as well.
Yes, I am too. It's always interesting because Superman novels are always an interesting thing to discuss and talk about. And
yeah,
I haven't done one yet on the podcast. I've wanted to, and I have a couple ideas for, but I was trying to find someone because this isn't as easily available for some people. And when I saw we had communicated about this, I thought this would be perfect. Today, we will be discussing the 1981 Elliot S. Maggins novel, Miracle Monday. So, Rob, before we get into the book, just for people who might not know, you do the Superfan podcast, the All-Star Superfan. Just quick breakdown about your podcast.
Yeah, so we've been running the All-Star Superfan podcast, myself and Alan Burke. A friend of mine, we've been running that for about 3 years now. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And we do a nice mix, just like yourself. We do a nice mix of, different things. We explore Superman throughout the 85-year multimedia legacy of the Man of Steel. We look at movies. We look at TV shows. We look at the comics. And we've interviewed a number of comic book writers and artists. And we've even interviewed a couple of actors from Superman movies and TV shows and things like that as well. And we like to do these deep dives where we look at a character like, say, Metallo across all the different versions of, the different TV shows and everything else. And we look at each one and kind of compare and contrast and that kind of thing. And we've done episodes on the radio show. We did a great episode on the Fleischer cartoons. And we love looking at the weird stuff, like the Broadway musical and the 1975 TV version of that. And the Superboy show gets a lot of airtime on our show, if anyone's familiar or even unfamiliar about that show. So we have a lot of fun, and we have a lot of other Superman podcasters on as guests as well. And so check us out.
Awesome. Yeah, we are no strangers to the Broadway musical here. As that will become very, very apparent on my channel over the next couple of months.
Excellent. Love to hear it.
As we begin our casting process in late May. So, but yeah, it's been great listening to your podcast. Some great episodes. I really did enjoy your one on It's a Bird, It's a Plane, and Superman, as I was, we were in the early stages of prepping to pitch to direct that musical here at our local theater. And you guys did that. And I was like, oh, this is good. It's a sign. It's a sign.
Stars aligned. I actually just finished a local theater production of something else, and I was pitching that to the theater group. I was like, guys, there's a Superman musical. We should do this. And they were like, oh, you're gonna have a hard time getting us to agree to that.
The only thing is, we sat down and just kind of went through, and the only thing I would say we tweaked just some of the language towards the Chinese, and
very understandable.
Yeah, so we fixed Father Ling's dialogue, just the broken English and stuff, and then I'm doing a combination of how we're presenting the Lings is more like a mafia-esque family.
Yes,
much like the TV version did. So
I was going to say, that is a wise change.
Yeah. So that but it's gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to this. Stretching those directing muscles again of mine. Now, moving on, just real quick, as we have done, how are you feeling just general about the new Superman film?
The new film, I would describe myself as a lot of fellow podcasters are as cautiously optimistic. So, for anyone who doesn't know, I didn't really take to the previous era of Superman movies for one reason or another. I think there was a lot of interesting ideas in there, and I'm not one of these people who was like dead set against some of the decisions Snyder made. I just don't really care for him as a storyteller. Just didn't really float my boat, those films. So I was keen to see something kind of closer to my own personal version of Superman. And this looks like it's heading in that direction. And I'll say as well, I really liked James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films. I don't know if I loved either of them, but I really, really did enjoy them. And the second one, especially, it really had a good, emotional pull to it, which I think has been lacking from a lot of Superman movies. And then I would say as well that I really liked his Peacemaker show and his Suicide Squad movie. So I'm just interested to see what he does. And I think a lot of the decisions he's made so far look promising. I don't think the suit is perfect. I think it's an interesting change, and it does evoke All-Star Superman in some kind of shots and things like that. But and I think David Carnswet, it looks fabulous in the role. I think the cast is very promising. I'm really excited about Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. And I would probably agree though that the trailers so far, they've been very charming and kind of pleasant to watch, but they haven't really had that kind of oomph yet for me, where it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to see this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
Especially that recent footage that came out in the Fortress of Solitude. I was like, oh, cool, the robots are in this. That's fun. And the fortress looks fun. And oh, look at that kooky magnifying glass thing he's using to heal himself. That's really interesting. It's like something out of a Frank Quitely drawing. But there was no moment where I was like, wow, But I think it's going to be a fun movie. I really, really hope it does well financially, because we know that there's a lot riding on it, which is unfortunate. It always seems to happen with these Superman reboots, that there's a lot riding on them financially. But I'm hoping for the best, but I'm not setting myself up for heartbreak like I did before. Is my best answer I can give.
I agree with you. I'm hoping for the best, and I've been having a lot of conversations just recently about how important it is when you put something, you commit a character on film. That's where the legacy is going to lie.
Yes, it's good.
That's because everyone, like general fans or whatever, that can be their introduction. That's going to be kind of in their mind, like what is canon, so to speak. Moving forward. So it really is important that you don't do like a take on the character, but you present the best, most full version, truest of the character on film, because that's what's going to resonate as the character for generations.
That's a really good point, and I think we have seen the fallout from that. Whereas for a lot of people, Man of Steel and the Snyder films are literally Superman to them, and they don't understand that there's actually this complex history to the character, and it isn't just that version. And they're pointing at all these things in this trailer. Oh, the real Superman would never do this, or the real Superman would never, this, that, or the other thing, or he'd never have robots in the Fortress of Solitude, or he'd never have a goofy little dog, or that's ridiculous. And then you're kind of like, well, actually, there's so much evidence of this. But for a generation of people, Henry Cavill is their Superman. So, as you say, it is incredibly important that they present as strong and as realized an incarnation as they possibly can, and be true to the ideals of the character. But I would make the argument that the ideals of the character have changed so much, here and there, and evolved so much throughout the ages that, every new interpretation is valid as well, and that's probably something we're going to get talking about with this, some of the stuff that happens in this story and how it relates to other stories, I think.
So let's get into our book here. Just a quick synopsis here. Miracle Monday is a novel written by Elliot S. Maggins, starring DC Comics superhero Superman. It was published in 1981. A revised edition was published in 2017. This is Elliot's Maggins' second Superman novel, following Superman Last Son of Krypton. As with Maggins' first novel, the original edition was published as a tie-in with the then current Superman film series, with the first edition including a photograph of Christopher Reeve as the character. The novel is not, however, an adaptation of any of the films, nor does it take place in the same continuity. All right. Basically, quick plot synopsis here. I don't want to give anything away, but in the story, Samael, the ruler of Hell, sends his greatest agent of evil, CW Saturn, to Earth to destroy Superman morally. Saturn is able to enter our dimension thanks to Lex Luthor, having used a form of magic to escape prison, leaving a hole between worlds. At the same time, Kristen Wells, a history graduate student from the far future, uses time travel technology to arrive in the present for the purpose of finding out the origin of the holiday known as Miracle Monday, which is known only to be somehow connected to Superman. All right. That's where I'm going to stop with this summary, because I don't want to give any too much away, but
sure.
So which version of the book or do you have?
So currently I hold one of the most recent versions of the book in my hands, and there's an interesting story with that. I prior to this, I had read the ebook years ago, and I think I may have even read it for free, because there was a period where this was out of print, but you could find digital versions of it very easily online. But what happened was Elliot S. Maggins, for anyone who doesn't know, he holds the publishing rights to this book himself. So because of whatever strange 1979 contract he had at the time, he is fully within his legal right to sell this story himself and make 100% of the money from it. And you might remember Superman and Lois made a reference to Miracle Monday. It was completely nothing to do with the story. They just said the word miracle. They held a parade and they called it Miracle Monday. And there was a little bit of Elliot S. Maggin, I think, was a little bit upset about it because he didn't get paid for that reference or anything, you know. So I made the point to everyone at the time. I was like, go and buy this book, even if you don't want to read it or whatever. But like, he makes all the money from it. So like, we kind of owe it to him as fans to support his work, you know. But what I wanted to say as well is, I didn't actually know this, but there is a quote from me on the second or third page. So he uses a lot of quotes from Goodreads reviews. And the very last one he uses is, Miracle Monday has the best characterization of Lex Luthor I've ever seen. In the run-up to Man of Steel, this book is well worth a read. Gotham 27. And that's me. So that's kind of fun.
Oh, wow. That's
and awesome. I didn't realize this until I bought it, which is
that is awesome. Man, that's cool. So that makes it even better that you're here for this.
Yeah, there you go.
So I have the same copy you do. I bought both of the books a couple of years ago, just because they were on Amazon's printing and everything. And I was like, I've heard them to be talked about. I've wanted to read them. I was like, I'm not sure when I'll get a chance to, but I'm just gonna go ahead and buy them now. And I went ahead and bought both of them. And I read the first one, and I enjoyed it, you know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to read this one, and I've heard that this one was more, I don't want to say interesting, but it was definitely different. So I was like, all right, so we're going to do this one. And so for this podcast, I actually did a combination of reading the book, and then Elliot S. Maggin did a podcast called Elliot Makes Things Up, where he reads the book to you. Each episode is like him reading a chapter or two. So I did kind of a mixture of reading the book and doing that because I drive a lot for work. And so it was just kind of nice to listen to while driving. That way, you know, you kind of get a feel for some of the inflection and the characters from listening to the author. Yeah. So if anyone is interested,
go ahead.
No, if anyone's interested, like it's, you know, it's out there. He did both books, but he did Miracle Monday first. You know, just it's called Elliot Makes Things Up. So
I actually did the exact same thing. I also drive a lot for work, and I had a really, really busy week, and I was trying to get this read on time, and I was like, if I'm just reading this, reading the physical copy or reading my Kindle, I'm never gonna have it read in time. So I did listen to his audiobook podcast. It is kind of a strange way to do an audiobook. Like, he breaks it up. He doesn't even break it up by chapters. Like, one week he'll do one short chapter, like a 15-minute podcast. And then another week he'll do like 3 chapters in a row, and it'll be like an hour long. And then what he also does is he puts in these little just these little asides as well, where he'll talk about the chapter a little bit and give a little bit of context about something that might have informed it when he was writing it. And it kind of, it's like a mix between reading the book and also his own memoirs in an interesting way. And like, he gets into some dark stuff in places. I don't want to go into it, but you know, some dark experiences that he had, and then he talks a little bit about creator work for hire and creator rights and stuff like that. And it's very, very interesting. And as you said as well, he does have a calm, kind of a teacherly voice, and it is nice and pleasant listening to him read his own story. And I think he did a really good job. The only criticism I have is there's a lot of diary entries in this book, and he uses a typewriter sound effect when the diary entries are being read, and sometimes the typewriter can be louder than his voice. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I thought, oh, that's cool. Like, if you would start with the typewriter, and when you do the ding, and then he starts talking, so it kind of just sets in your mind someone typing, you know, and then when he's done reading the entry, like, you have the sound effect of like the typewriter, kind of like of the ding, kind of closing it out. But yeah, it was interesting. And you know what? I guess if I was making that podcast, like, no matter how I recorded it, but I think I would do each chapter as an episode. And then, like, when I did those other things, make those, like, I would record them, you know, and then maybe later edit them in as like afterwards, you know, before I start the next book. I don't, something like that. That way, for if someone's like following along and just wants to listen to a chapter or something, they're not like, wait, how many chapters did we read today? Like, how many did he go over? But I agree with the teacherly voice. Like, it reminds me of being in school, and like the teacher's like, we're going to review this chapter. I'll read it to the class today.
Yeah. The other thing I say as well, that, you know, the benefit to him doing it that way is, I would advise against trying to shotgun this book in a week. I would really take your time with this book, because it is dense. There is so much information in it, and some of the kind of character descriptions and stuff, it can take a while to really process a lot of the information. So I would take your time with it, and maybe like some chapters you're going to want to read twice, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
To really absorb all the and in fact, you know, leading up to this episode this morning, I was kind of rereading the last couple of chapters twice, just to really make sure that I knew what exactly had happened. And you know, I don't mean that as a criticism of the book either. I think it's just full of imagination and full of ideas and things, and you just really have to take your time and read it carefully so that you're absorbing it all.
No, I agree, because there was times where I felt like, and this isn't a criticism, it's just I'm listening and I know the plot, but he's going off and he's talking a lot about Lex and Clark in the past, and it is definitely set in the Bronze Age.
Oh, 100%.
And that is one error of comics that I have not yet really dove into. You know, we've been reading a lot of post-crisis. We've done some Golden Age. You know, I have plans for Silver Age stuff in the near future. But Bronze is really one I haven't got myself into. And I didn't really think about that much, but that is where this story is set. And so there's little things in it that I'm like, oh yeah, you know, that was going on in the comics at the time, like,
yeah,
with Clark being the TV reporter, you know. And then just Elliot would go in and describe, like I said, like the past of Clark, and I don't want to say he dates the book, but he does, because there's a lot of references to pop culture, but like political culture and history.
Yeah.
That put the story in the time that it's being published. So it made it very interesting how they go on and he would talk about like uh a lot of more like political, like real world stuff, and I'm like, interesting. Okay, why are we talking about that? Like,
Yeah.
it's informing the world, right? But I'm like, I'm more interested in what this story is of Superman going up against um this demon, this agent CW Saturn. So I was like, okay, and then there's no reference to any other heroes or anything like that. It's just Superman.
No. Yeah.
Because I feel like when you do a story like this now, if you were putting this in a comics or whatever, you'd have like, because of the magic element, Superman would seek out other people to find out or to help or something.
Yeah, like there's a character in this called Max Maven, and he is a magician that performs at the Magic Castle. And he's, without giving too much away, he's also revealed to be, somewhat kind of telepathic and psychic. And he is kind of Superman's guy that he goes to get more information about this guy, CW Saturn. And yeah, to your point, absolutely. If this was written now, he would go to Dr. Fate, and it'd be something like that,
And did you like keep mixing up? I just kept wanting to call him Max Minkin.
100%. I was like, did he change? Was it supposed to be Max Menken from the Broadway musical and he had to change it? I was like, they're so similar names. Absolutely. I was thinking of Max.
I'm so inundated right now with the script and going through it and just hearing that close of alliteration. I was like, my mind just kept, what? Who? Hey, him?
I would say to your point about the kind of the weird 80s isms as well, that there is a couple that really, really stand out in my mind. That there's a bit where a character faints. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of a really specific thing that happens and it sets off the plot. A character faints, and the way they revive her is they get a tin of concentrated orange juice or something like this, and they open the or a concentrated orange juice mixture, they refer to it, and they shove it down her throat to revive her. I was like, what the heck is this? And then there's another bit where Morgan Edge, who is Clark's boss in this, because he owns Galaxy Broadcasting where Clark works, he calls him up and he says, Kent, I need you on top of your apartment building right now. There's a chopper coming and you're about to cover 4 stories. Grab some coffee if you haven't already. Or actually, there's no time. Just take the instant coffee granules by the spoonful and shove them in your mouth. I was like, what a weird thing to say. I don't know. And it just had this kind of weird kind of 80s boomerness to it. To your point. And also the thing that I think really, really sets the time for when this is set is Kristen Wells is working on her speech patterns because she's from the distant future and she's traveling back in time. And she comes up with this kind of 70s, 80s kind of style of speech that she prepares. And she calls it disco speak because, disco, it's still the early 80s. There's still a bit of disco going on. And then, and she refers to it as that throughout. And that there's a lot of kind of like disco slang in the way she talks and stuff like that. So that would be very, very different if it was written today.
Yes, it would. And I'm trying to think of some of the others. And we were joking, we started here. It's not super early for me in the morning here. It's 7:00. But the funny is, of course, the night that I have to get up to do this is when my dogs go crazy all night long because of the storm. So I'm just like, I'm still running on like wake up sleep. But there's a few other points in here that of just referencing to people and things that have gone on and that they
reference the shadow like a couple of times in this.
Thank you.
He references Lamont Cranston and his distinctive laugh, and it's like, I know who Lamont Cranston is, but like even back then, I feel like that would have been a dated reference.
Yes, that was one because it says like the shadow, and I was like, oh, okay.
He describes CW Saturn as having a laugh, like a sinister laugh, not unlike the laugh of Lamont Cranston, and you're like. Now, I think that is a thing that like people would reference. Like even in Watchmen, Alan Moore references the Shadow a couple of times in that. And I'm like, do people reading this know who the Shadow is?
But that makes, I guess that makes a little bit more sense to me because they're really trying to make it like this alternate history of
Mm,
of the world,
yeah.
Um, but The Shadow was a big radio series, but I feel like that's kind of it. We have the Alec Baldwin movie to reference for
Yeah.
positive or negative. Um,
I mean, there was pulps, and they did occasionally reprint them in kind of paperback novel form throughout the 60s and 70s. So maybe kind of people were still sort of aware in osmosis of what he was, But weird.
the one that got me that I thought was interesting is just when Superman goes to like the Disney the club, and he runs into Ray Bradbury, and
Oh yes, yeah,
they
yeah,
they have that whole discussion about when he was Superboy and him and Ray Bradbury in Disneyland, and the whole thing about they go in the whole conversation about Walt Disney running for mayor, but it didn't happen. Like, I was like, this feels very tangential. Like,
yeah.
just you're just going off. I'm like, I don't really care about all this. Like, um,
And and that is a perfect example of kind of how kind of quirky and offbeat Maggins' writing style is across both of these novels. Like it kind of feels like he's going off in weird directions sometimes.
mm,
And yeah, and that's kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is like you really have to be patient with these because he is going somewhere, because what he eventually builds is so beautiful that you're so glad that you kind of you took the time with it. I agree that the pacing can feel very strange and even a little bit erratic at times.
mm-hmm,
Um, but like you can absolutely see the influence that this kind of writing had on people like Grant Morrison especially, but also like Mark Waid and to a lesser extent Mark Miller and like all those kind of hotshot Superman writers from the 90s and beyond. I think they took a lot of inspiration from Elliot S. Maggin, and I think in many ways I would call him the most underrated Superman writer ever, just because people don't really talk about him as much anymore.
mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. There are times where you're kind of like, what? Why are we going to the Magic Castle? Why are we talking about instant coffee? Why are we, like just weird asides? But when you get to where he's going, it all kind of works, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and we'll talk about that here soon. Like the Ray Bradbury was just kind of neat because um one thing we've done with my kids is every year come October we start rereading The Halloween Tree by Ray
Mm.
Bradbury. Um so that's like our most well-known Ray Bradbury story in this house. So I was just like, that's what I was thinking about. Like, I know Ray Bradbury's done a lot more things, but to me, when I hear him, I always think of The Halloween Tree. Um, so that's kind of where I was with this. But one of the things that I really liked in this was the idea of the whole, and this is, I'm a, I would say I'm not a continuity snob, but I
Mm.
love tightly done continuity. Like that's why um, it frustrates me when we have uh changes just for the sake of changes. Like, you know, it's now like Lionel Luthor has kind of become Lex's father's name because of Smallville.
Yeah.
Like, but in the comics, there was sometimes they'd reference like whatever, just like how it took a while before Martha and Jonathan were cemented as Clark's parents. So when we start this and they talk about the Luthor history, and we have the Lena Thorl character,
Yeah.
I thought was really neat that we have this Lena Thorl where it's kind of like Lex's sister, but she kept the original name. And Lex later would change his name to Luthor. I thought that was just an interesting um,
Wait, is it
story.
not that she changed her name to Thorl from Luther to Thorl?
No,
No.
no, it's from Lex changed it from Thorl to Luthor. That's what I thought it was.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow, I didn't
Maybe
pick that
maybe I
up.
got it backwards. Maybe I got it. I don't. But I thought the original name was Thorl. I could be wrong. Um, because I was listening, and then when I went, that was one of the parts where I was listening to it, and he went on to describe. I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, so
And
I thought that was a neat little. because the whole Lena Luthor thing drives me crazy because one writer's like, "Oh, that's his sister." No, that's his daughter.
That's
And
his daughter.
I think we used to have someone come out and be like, "Yeah, Lena is named after his sister." Ta-da! I fixed it. Like, like it is his sister, but then he had a daughter and named him after his sister.
Forgive my ignorance. Is that not the case in Post Crisis that his daughter is named after his sister, or did they never actually reveal that he had a sister called Lena in Post Crisis comics?
I think if I remember right after in Post Crisis, I don't think they talk about the sister at all.
Okay, wow.
But
I didn't know
then
that.
he just gets so muddy. Like,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm really excited to read the Mark Waid History of the DC Universe book.
Yeah.
Where he's supposed to because I don't know how current you are on reading in the main Superman titles, like over the past, like where Lena came back as Lex's daughter, and there's they reference the history, and so that's where I'm like, it's very hard sometimes to read comics when you're jumping around. Like, oh, I'm reading Post Crisis, right over early '90s for this podcast, but then in my podcast we're reading
Yeah.
2000s and then current, and just after a while with all the subtle reboots and crises, you're like, okay, where, who, what?
Am I my own grandfather now? Is that how that works?
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I'm currently sort of on and off reading the entire I call it the Steel Age of Superman. So John Byrne all the way up till Infinite Crisis. I'm trying to finally do that. But then in the midst of all that, I occasionally check back in on like the Joshua Williamson run of Superman is kind of where the most recent stuff I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also reading Last Days of Lex Luthor by Mark Waid, which is kind of in its own continuity, but like tangentially related to Birthright. And then I'm also checking out Absolute Superman, which is totally a different thing. So yeah, it's crazy when you kind of have to stop and go, okay, so what's canon in this one?
Yeah, it is. I was doing a podcast with my friend called Electric Mullet, where we were reading from
Amazing.
Man of Steel. We were going, through the '90s, but he had to put that on pause for a little while, and then we're reading ours. I have not read The Death of Lex Luthor yet because I'm going to wait till the third one gets published and just read all. Since it was so long between 1 and 2, and we're supposed to be getting 3 on time, I'm just going to wait till 3 releases. Then I'm going to read all 3 of them again together.
I think that is actually a good idea because the second issue is dense. There's a lot going on in it, and it kind of probably would benefit from reading the third chapter closely after it.
And then I know that you guys just did your review of the first 5 issues of Absolute Superman, which I look forward to listening to, but I haven't read issue 5 yet because I've just been reading them on the app because my comic book store here closed, and the nearest one for me is like an hour. So I'm saving that after I read issue 5 to listen to. But it does get confusing because you have a lot of these books that are coming out monthly, and we're not as young as we used to be, where we actually have other adult things to focus on and keep our attention. We can't store all that information like we used to.
Yeah.
But the big thing that got me in this book is when they have the where Clark is on TV and CW Saturn basically melts his clothes away and reveals to the world that Clark Kent is Superman. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, this is a big deal. Like, all right, okay. And in the story, I have to remember that the Bronze Era depiction of Clark Kent and Superman is different because they definitely treat Clark more as a disguise.
Absolutely.
Like he's not a real person. He's just the role that Superman plays to fit in. Because there's dialogue with him and CW Saturn. There's dialogue with him and Lois about Clark. And that for me is always a kind of an issue. Like I don't like the idea that Clark is this fictitious, that it's just a disguise that Superman wears. It's not. I prefer much more of post-crisis where we went with Superman's identity. But that was definitely one of those things you have to adjust to when you're enjoying the story.
I agree. My preferred version is usually that Clark is sort of closer to who he really is. But I think if you're going to do the disguise Clark, I think this is a very fascinating and interesting way to do it. Like he doesn't just treat him as a disguise as such. Like he treats him almost like as a friend and like his connection to humanity. And like that there's a passage in it where he describes like when the identity is revealed later in the story, Superman acts as though there's been a death, like as if Clark has been killed and he's really lost a part of himself, and he really mourns the loss of Clark Kent. And the other characters do as well. They're like, it's never going to be the same now. We've essentially lost Clark. And he gives them all these kind of quirky kind of personality traits in this book, like that Clark Kent tapes TV ads off the TV and has a collection of tapes that are just made up of ads that he watches, like just all this weird stuff that he kind of gets up to when he's Clark Kent. And they talk a lot about the relationship with Lois and how complex that is. Like she goes on dates with Clark in this, but then also she's in love with Superman, and the discussion they have after the identity is revealed, and she's obviously very upset about it and all this kind of stuff, and they have a big fight, and that is just perfectly done. It's so lovely, that whole exchange. And if you're into kind of Superman and Lois romance type stuff, definitely check this book out for that in particular. I think it's done really, really well. So yeah, it is an adjustment, but I think it's really, really cleverly handled in this story. I think it's really, really interesting.
The part that threw me that I thought I missed something, okay, is when he talked about it's chapter 20, the standard nightmare, where he talked about going back to, he had a dream today that Jonathan and Martha coming to dinner in the home of his parents on Krypton, and the infant Kal-El seemed to recognize the farm couple. Like, I missed the part where he said a dream. So I'm listening, just like, whoa, what's going on? I'm like, back up. So like, I was like, wait. So I paused it, and then I got home, busted out my book, and I'm reading. I was like, oh, he said dream. Okay. I was like, this is crazy. I'm like, how did I not know this happened? So I was like, oh, that would be interesting. The Kents, the Kryptonian elves having dinner. But the final, I think this story really takes place when we get to the final chapters, where CW Saturn took active control of Kristen Wells' life. The young woman had been moved to commit, among others, the following acts of destruction: the disintegration of the steering wheels of the cars in Midtown, the attacking of pedestrians, the growth of roaches, the rising of killing winds across the countryside, the division of families and friends by causing them to speak different languages, parents forgetting the faces of their own children, the disarray of mass media by turning all the rubber insulation in the television radio network buildings into high conductive silver. That is a very nerdy line. Like, the people that people might not get and understand. The emptying of the digestive systems of a horde of citizens so that they become hungry enough to steal food from the city's grocery stores and supermarkets. The explosion of a fuel tank of every airplane to leave Metropolis International Airport. The and the incement of planet's most powerful government at the edge of nuclear war. And she had stolen Clark Kent. I was like, dang. So this is CW Saturn basically possessing Kristen Wells.
Yes.
And this is where it gets crazy, because I don't know if I missed anything or what, but there's nothing in here about who Kristen Wells' true identity is until the end.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading this, and I'm like thinking, and I'm picturing this in my head. And I'm thinking to myself, like, now I feel like when we get to stuff like this, we're like almost in another story, like the story that I've been wanting to really see and understand. Um, and then I thought to myself, do you remember a few years back where Warner Brothers Animation did those quasi sequel animated films to Batman in '66? The
Oh
one
yeah,
with, and I was thinking to myself, like, this is a story like that you could do as a fun Superman like animated film, kind of like that. Like, we spent so much time making these animated films when they were cranking them out. And I'm like, there's stories like this that you could have adapted into film that would just really live on. But then of course I feel like it comes back to, well, we have to pay Maggin to do it, and we're not going to do that. So
I also think that the story is so obscure now. It's not well known, and I think I hate saying this about the fandom, but like it's always such a shame to me that prose novels featuring these characters aren't more popular and that there isn't more of them, because it's such a great medium for them. But like you never hear people talking about, Enemies and Allies by Kevin J. Anderson, or Never Ending Battle by Roger Stern, or like there are really, really good novels featuring Superman. Um, and I wish they got more love. Like if you look at like the Star Trek fandom or Star Wars, or loads of other fandoms, novels are a big deal. But for whatever reason with superheroes, people either want comics or live action or cartoons. The novels are kind of, they kind of pop up here and there, but like I wish there was a lot more of them, because some of them are so good, and the medium really lends itself to characters like this, I think.
it does. I think it's because so many people take the characters and think of the visual aesthetic. Like,
Yes.
I love the visuals in comics, but to me, it is the dialogue, it is the words, the story that is in there. Um,
And I think when you have a character like Superman that so many people say, oh, well, he's boring and, not interesting, too powerful on it, then you do need to tell a morality based or a philosophical story rather than an action based one, even though he debuted in Action Comics, so, and that's exactly what this story is. Like, yeah, you described a bunch of chaotic things that CW Saturn sets off, and Superman has to fly around and solve them. But like, they are not necessarily the most interesting parts of the story. The most interesting parts of the story are Superman coming up against CW Saturn and Lex being in the middle of it all, and Kristen Wells, kind of observing humanity from the distant future, and all of that stuff is character driven. And that's why it's interesting, and that lends itself really, really well to a novel where it's more about the inner thoughts of all these characters.
Excuse me. You say that because I agree with you, because that is kind of this year. I'm covering this book. I'll be doing another book on the podcast, and diving into doing some Superman based novels is on my quote unquote to-do list. Is because I found that the character really does thrive.
Yeah.
And you can get more in the head of the character, and I like a good, novel.
And like to give another example, like that, there's a chapter in this called Song of the Earth, and it's basically Superman describing himself. It describes Superman as he opens his super hearing to listen to the music of the planet, basically. So it's all just the different sounds he's hearing all over the world, and it's people having arguments, or birds flapping their wings, or like a raindrop hitting the ground, and all this kind of stuff. And it's all kind of coalescing into one beautiful tone. And this is how he sees the world all the time, and hears the word all the time. And it's a really, really beautifully written piece of prose. And if you are kind of just skimming through this book, I would recommend just jump to that chapter, because it's so well written and so beautiful. And it reminded me of you know, the moment in All-Star Superman when Lex has that moment where all of his kind of super senses kind of overwhelm him and he starts crying and it's like this is how he views the world all the time. And you know, again, just talking about the inspiration other writers have taken from this story, like it's clear as day there. And then there's other stuff like that. He describes how you know, Superman sees an aura around all living things because of all of his senses working together at once. And when something is alive, it gives off such a beautiful kind of array of colors and stuff like that. And he can see this. And then when something dies, it just leaves something gray and ugly. And it's something he just can't stand to look at. And that's why he's so dead set against taking lives, because he just couldn't imagine the horror of having to inflict that. And that's absolutely something that Mark Waid took and put in Birthright as well, you know?
It's actually one of my favorite.
I asked Mark Waid that one time. I was like, you clearly took inspiration from this novel, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I absolutely love that novel. And I absolutely love Elliot S. Maggins' Superman. So,
you know, Maggin has been quoted that Superman is morality tales.
Yeah.
And I like that with the character. So there is a part. So we get before we go on any more tangents. That's what we could do forever. You know, towards the end of the book, the big thing is we have CW Saturn, you know, possessing Kristen Wells, and basically Saturn is trying to get Superman to kill Kristen, thus defeating him. But Superman refuses to kill Kristen, even if it means he would have to spend the rest of his life battling Saturn. At that moment, because of the rules that bind demons, Saturn is defeated and forced to grant Superman a wish. He asks that everything that happened since Saturn's arrival be undone, and it is granted, with Saturn then being banished back to hell. However, a lingering memory of the events remained within the souls of humanity, causing them to begin celebrating the day every year on the third Monday of May, starting the Miracle Monday tradition. Kristen then returns to the future to reveal this fact to the public.
Lovely.
I felt that the twist that she's a time traveler was kind of like a whoa, what? Like, I just feel like it changed so much of like the dynamic of trying to understand the origins of Miracle Monday and what that really was. And I felt that it was the part that kind of stopped me for a minute is when he's like, give me Clark Kent back.
Yeah.
And then it almost felt like he was trading, you know, Clark Kent for Kristen. And I was like, wait, what's going on? Because he's like, because he says, I'm trying to find the exact line about.
I think Saturn says something like, oh no, it can't be undone because the way the public learned about Clark Kent and Superman was done by natural means. So I can't undo that. And the only way to undo that is to wipe the memory of Kristen Wells so that I can restore the memory everyone has of Clark Kent. So no one remembers Kristen Wells' role in this story at all. And she returns to the future and that's fine. But everyone goes back to not knowing that Clark and Superman are the same man. Bit convoluted, complex, but it works. It's basically they reset the status quo at the end of the story.
And I was like, and that's what kind of got me because I was like, wait a minute. In one breath, I felt like Superman was fighting to save Kristen. And then it's like, oh, I can give you back Clark Kent if no one ever remembers about Kristen. And he's like, okay. And I was like, wait, what? That feels weird. That doesn't feel like right to me. But then it kind of plays out correctly. But then it makes the kind of John Connor loophole that that's why nobody knows how Miracle Monday started. And Kristen herself doesn't realize her role she plays in actually creating Miracle Monday.
No, she does though. She retains the memories.
And then so that's what I'm thinking.
Sorry.
No. So I'm like, okay, I'm kind of, I'm going, and then she drops line, she remembered, and I'm like, okay, never mind. All right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then she's like, I'm going to go back and tell everyone. And I'm like, all right. So I'm just going to roll with what happened. I'm not going to try to really break it up. Cause cause that last like dialogue between CW Saturn and Superman, I think is really, it is the heart of the story, where you push
Yeah.
Superman to break his code of who he is, and what he stands for. And if you can do that, then you've beat him. But the whole part where it talks about he's making the medicine to revive her,
Yeah.
where he's like, he went to the laboratory at the medical school where he left an IOU for the chemicals he lifted. He wiped garlic and a paper bag from a grocery store on Columbus Avenue. On the ledge, whose cashier at the eye-blinding speed, he left 3 quarters from Clark Kent's pocket, which was in the pouch of his cape. I'm like, okay. He filled the paper bag with hawthorn berries that he found growing in Evenside Park. In the next 3 seconds, he streaked the 3.5 miles from Evenside Height downtown to the Galaxy Building. I was like, all right. So he's making the medicine. He brings it back, and then she wakes up or comes back alive and has the conversation with him. And then it's interesting. She says, Kristen Wells, Brady's class of 53, Columbia history of 55. And then he's talking like, and then she reveals class of 2855. And she said doctoral maybe in 2859 if I'm lucky. And then she says, Happy Miracle Monday, Superman. And then it goes into the story and about her being from the future, and about how I like this chapter, because I like how it talks about all the world kind of was celebrating, but they really didn't understand why.
Yeah.
What
it's
it was.
It's such a kooky comic book idea that there's this long-standing celebration for centuries, but nobody can remember why it is. It's like when it's like, I think in the Flash comics that there was this period where Keystone City was just this mass, everyone had forgotten that Keystone City existed, and they forgot that they had family members there and all this kind of stuff. And then when it was restored or whatever, people kind of embraced all these people that they'd forgotten all about. It's just classic comic nonsense. I love it.
Yeah, it's just crazy because they're talking about people getting along and feeling revived, and they don't know why or what's happened. And it's, because they don't have the memory of what's going on. And earlier they made it, I thought what I did like was, and I didn't mention this earlier, was how there was kind of like almost like the plagues, and that the biblical plagues that were happening and going on too, that CW Saturn was bringing about, because they talk about the different areas and stuff and I thought that was good. Like that just helped sell this demonic entity that Superman is facing and what they're doing to the world. We learn that there are other time travels that are there that are booking hotels and staying to celebrate, Miracle Monday.
Yeah, that's lovely. That, and that, and that they traveled back. I don't know, is it revealed in this novel or is it one of Maggins' other comics, but that there was time travelers there when Superman's rocket landed in Smallville. They were all huddled around in the trees watching.
There is a reference to like something like that in here where they said like, I'm looking for but yeah, something about your arrival. Oh, here it is. Hold on. Let me back up a page. There were a lot of them hiding out in the woods and the wheat fields around the place where the Kents found you as a baby, but not as many as there are here. They're all going home empty-handed and empty-headed, except for me. And now I know why.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting. He says, wait, a second. Saturn told me he picked you out of to use because you were different. You weren't so different. If there are hundreds more like you from the future scattered around the city, they weren't here yet when CW Saturn first entered the Earth. That was my idea, coming a year early for my dissertation. That way, I figured I could at least have some good stories to write about, even if I didn't learn any more about Miracle Monday. So that whole like revelation, she's been here basically for a year. Um, and then the one that was fun was the breakdown about how she's actually a descendant of Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah.
She's like,
and that's why she wouldn't go on a date with him.
she's like, there's got to be a James Bartholomew Olsen the third, if for no other reason the fact that James Bartholomew Olsen the fourth has to marry my great however many great grandmother. Like,
amazing.
I was like, oh, okay, all right. I'm like, that's cool. Like, I like that.
And there's a fun bit, and this totally dates the book as well, that she's really attracted to Steve Lombard because he has this hairy chest, and in the distant future, people don't have chest hair anymore. So she finds this incredibly attractive. I just thought that was so weird and kooky and great.
Yeah, I think kooky is the perfect way to describe some of the just plot references and stuff. And I kind of wish in a way that Maggin would commission this or whatever to be made into a comic. I don't know if he can.
Yeah.
Because I would like that, because I just feel like going back to what you said earlier, I think that in some way, and this is just a cultural observation of dealing with teenagers and children, is we don't press the importance of taking your time to dive into anything, a novel especially. It's quick, digestible content, media, stories, and jump to the next thing. There's no and I think that's why you don't hear like these characters in novels are talked about. It's because people don't go back and mine the novels. Like, they don't want to spend a whole chapter, about how Superman sees something. They want to jump to the next big action piece.
Instant gratification.
Yeah. And I think that's why the novels are more important, is because we need the time to take the time for story instead of just here's this little blip.
I couldn't agree more. And it's something I come up against with other fans and even friends, and it is sometimes you have to put the work in to really enjoy something and really take something away from it. And I would also stress as well that like entertainment isn't the prime directive of every piece of media. Like there is a far more of a kind of a spectrum of experience you can have with a story that goes beyond just empty dopamine,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think that's all people are looking for from stories. Well, I just want to be entertained. And I think that can be a bit reductive. Like, it's okay to be frightened or unsettled or, made feel uncomfortable by a story, and or think that something is odd or strange, but have to kind of press on with it. I think that's actually that there's a nobility to that, like taking your time to really read something and pay it the attention that it deserves, because so much passion and time and effort goes into these things. So don't approach something with the sole attitude of, well, I just want to be entertained and I want the feel good feelings in my brain to set off. Like there's more to stories than that. So I agree with what you're saying.
Sometimes you need to meditate on a concept and just what does this mean? What does the outcome of the story, what could it possibly really be about? So, and I think this is a story that I'll revisit later on as I think about it, because I feel like almost like one time isn't enough.
100%. I definitely, even reading that, this is the second time I think reading this for me, and I did feel that way I was like, God, I kind of want to read this a third time in case there's stuff I've missed, because it is such a dense story, you know. And the first book, by the way, as well, Last Son of Krypton, I barely remember that one. Like, I really have to go back and read that one. Now,
See,
I don't remember it being as strong or as thought provoking as this one is, but I am keen to read it because, like I said in my quote, in the book that's apparently been printed in a couple of editions, I think the way he writes Lex Luthor in this is just incredible. I think Maggin writes one of the most interesting kind of complex versions of Lex there's ever been. And Lex is in both stories. I can't for the life of me remember what he does in the first one, but
see, what I remember about the first one is I remember like talking about how like it was like Albert Einstein coming to find the baby, like,
yes,
and everything. And I remember that, and I was like, okay. And I think that one's grounded more in reality, I think, compared to this one, if I remember right. So I think having read Miracle Monday and digging a little bit more into Maggins' style and having read some of his comics since I originally read that, I would have a better understanding and appreciation going back and reading Last Son.
I thoroughly recommend checking out as many of Maggins' actual comics as you can. He wrote a story called The Einstein Connection, which is one of my favorite Lex Luthor stories ever. And he did a lot of cool stuff with Lex in the comics, and he elaborated on I didn't even realize this was him who did this, but the classic Superboy origin of Lex losing his hair and vowing revenge on Superboy and all that. The original story itself, I think, was written by Jerry Siegel in the 60s, and it is great. But Elliot Maggin kind of did like a do-over of it in the 70s, where I think it was him who established that actually the reason Lex was so full of vengeance and so angry at Superboy, it wasn't so much that he lost his hair, it was more that he was working on a different experiment at the time, and he was trying to create life itself or something like that. And during the chemical fire that happened that resulted in his hair loss, this experiment was destroyed. And that's the thing that really set him off. It wasn't the hair loss. It was this beautiful experiment that he was working on. That Superboy destroying that is why he hates him so much. I thought that was an interesting new development. And I don't know, by the way, if you know this. I hope I'm not spoiling 50-year-old comics, but Kristen Wells is a major character in Superman mythology. She comes back in the comics. And I think it was Elliot S. Maggin who did this. She becomes the first Superwoman.
Yeah. And it's like I knew the name. Like I was like, okay, that sounds familiar. But I didn't put two and two together. I didn't like connect the tissue. And then I did, and I was like, oh, okay. Like I'm like, this is gonna go a lot deeper than I originally thought.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I need to really, you know, reacquaint myself with this character, because I feel like it's one of those characters that is prominent that we just don't realize where the character actually comes from.
Yeah, and she is a bit more of an obscure character. Like I don't think she was ever brought back in Post-Crisis. She's very much a fixture of kind of late stage Bronze Age Superman, or even some people refer to that era as Platinum Age. It's like the couple of years right before the John Byrne reboot. She's kind of that's her domain, you know.
I hadn't heard the Platinum Age reference, but
I want to say it was Anthony Desiato who alerted me to that term, Platinum Age. I might be wrong. It could have been someone else, but I thought it was a fascinating term for it. Yeah.
Sounds like him. Because, yeah, like I stated earlier, like the Bronze Age is definitely an era that I need to dig into more, and I'll get there, you know. Like, there's no need to rush. There's plenty of Superman stuff to read and dig through. You know, I'll get there.
I would recommend that. I also feel the same way. I need to read more Bronze Age, but I have read a lot, and there's great stuff in there. There's great Superman stories, great Lex Luthor stories. You know, for all the for all the talk about how they sort of quote unquote improved Lex Luthor in post crisis. And I do think, making him a billionaire industrialist, I think that was a good idea and it was a good change. But like Lex was a very, very interesting character before that. And there's great story. Luthor Unleashed by, I want to say it's Carrie Bates and Kurt Swan. That's really, really good. The Einstein Connection I mentioned. Must There Be a Superman, I think it's called. That's also written by Maggin. That's a great story. There's a bunch of the Sand Superman saga. Very strange, very kooky storyline by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. Like that kind of started the Bronze Age. Like absolutely read that. I don't want to say it's good necessarily. It's a bit wacky, but it is worth a read. There's a bunch of really cool stuff in that era.
I love the app for what it provides, but I hate the app when it doesn't have a lot of stuff, because I remember a while back I was trying to find a bunch of just the Elliot S. Maggin written stories, and they had some, but you know how the app tanks and goes.
This is the DC Infinite app.
Yeah.
100%. Oh, there's so much stuff that isn't there. Like if you try to just read a bunch of Silver Age Superman, there is not that much on that app. There's like maybe 30 or 40 issues. It's like barely anything.
And it's problematic because I'm like, I don't understand how those old stories you can't just put them in there. Like if you don't want to scan them and make them like the high quality, just give me just a cheap scan just so I can read them.
Oh, please. I would prefer a cheap scan in a lot of ways, because when they change up the coloring and all that, it's like watching the Star Wars special editions. Like it doesn't look like what it would have looked like back in the day, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Whereas if you download comics illegally, for especially out of print, or not out of print, but comics that haven't been digitized yet, if you download them illegally and you get the look of the paper and you get the ads. Now I know they can't put the ads in, but
right.
I understand why that. But like
the ads are exciting.
The ads are exciting, and it looks so much more legit when you see the kind of the way it was printed at the time, and that those kind of inkjet dots and all that stuff, and the yellow of the page and all that. I can't understand why that isn't part of digitizing comics. Like we want that experience. I would have said,
Yeah.
I totally get why new comics don't look like that. That's fine. But when I read an old comic, I want it to have that sort of frayed vintage look to it,
I agree 100%. And one of the best things about reading old comics, like I said, is the ads, because it just really puts you in a special place. But
yeah,
Rob, I want to thank you for joining us today and having our conversation here on Miracle Monday. It is a dense book, and I haven't done a lot of book reviews, so I'm like, I wasn't sure like exactly how to approach. Like you can do a deep dive into the book, or you can have like a discussion. And for a first time book review, not a bad chat.
Nice.
We'll maybe we'll have to plan, and we'll go and we'll do a deeper dive, and we'll do Last Son of Krypton in the future. So we both seem to have an interest in reviewing that material.
Absolutely, yeah. And I must heartily encourage anyone who hasn't read this to check it out. I would encourage people to just jump straight into this one. From what I remember, it is the better of the two, and I thoroughly enjoyed rereading it. And I came away from it, when I finally finished it yesterday, I just had such a big smile on my face. I love how it all unfolds. I love the stuff they do with both Superman and Lex and Lois and Kristen Wells and all the characters. And while it can be a challenging read at times, I think it is worth the challenge. It's so rewarding and so fulfilling, and it's one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. I would safely say, and it's an undiscovered gem. I think it's brilliant that it's out there, and it's great that Elliot S. Maggin himself makes all the money every time a copy is sold. So seek it out and give it a read. I ask you.
I 100% agree. I will have the links in the show notes to purchase the book. I will also have the links if you want to go to, and listen to Elliot Makes Things Up, and you can link to your favorite podcast provider in the show notes. So you can enjoy it too. And you know what's funny is you said jump to this one. It is I agree because I mean even on Elliot's podcast, he starts with Miracle Monday
Yeah.
and does The Last Son. And I think that's part of in my consciousness why I wanted to go and do this one. So I kept remembering I think this was the better one people talked about. So yeah. But Rob, thanks a lot. Just plug where can people find you guys online to check out your
Yeah.
podcast?
So we are All Star Super Fan. We have a very active Twitter, Instagram. We have a group inside the All Star Super Fan podcast that's very active on Facebook. We're on all the big podcatcher services, Apple Podcasts. We always appreciate when people rate and review us there. And we're on all the other ones as well. Google. We recently launched on YouTube. If anyone wants to give that a go, and come along, we have a lot of fun. And a lot of great discussion over there. So check us out.
All right. Check them out. It's a good time. I thoroughly enjoy listening to them. Like I said, it was a chuckle when they did their musical episode. I considered a sign that I was on the right path there. So check them out. And remember,